Suing the federal government is by default impossible. The doctrine of sovereign immunity acts as a total bar against civil liability, ensuring the state cannot commit a legal wrong in its own courts. The Federal Tort Claims Act provides the only narrow, conditional waiver of this immunity. Proceeding under this act requires navigating a series of procedural requirements, where a single error leads to immediate dismissal. This analysis deconstructs the FTCA complaint in Bennett v. United States. The filing invokes 28 U.S.C. Section 1346B to seek compensatory damages for alleged federal negligence. We are examining the structural mechanics of civil procedure and statutory interpretation. Our goal is to understand the legal engineering of the complaint, not to evaluate the underlying medical science. Analyzing the architecture of this specific case reveals the technical requirements for litigating against the modern administrative state. Stephen Bennett was a senior management analyst for the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, working under a permanent remote telework arrangement. During the implementation of a vaccine mandate, Bennett requested a fully licensed BLA product. He noted that the only vaccines physically available were authorized under emergency use authorization, a regulatory status with distinct legal standards for safety and liability. The complaint alleges the Department of Health and Human Services issued guidance falsely presenting available EUA products as legally equivalent to fully approved BLA products. Bennett's employer cited this HHS guidance as the factual basis for denying his exemption requests and finalizing his termination. The central challenge for the plaintiff is establishing a direct causal link between a federal agency's public policy statements and the termination of a specific employee. This logic map identifies the 4 nodes a complaint must clear to survive a government motion to dismiss. Node 1 involves the strict exhaustion of administrative remedies and the adherence to statutory time limits. Bennett was terminated in March 2022, and the FTCA mandates that an administrative claim be filed within 2 years of the injury. To address the statute of limitations, the complaint invokes the Kubrick discovery rule. It argues that the specific causal connection to HHS conduct was not legally ascertainable until later disclosures regarding vaccine availability and internal agency communications. Alternatively, the plaintiff asserts fraudulent concealment tolling, alleging that HHS's affirmative public representations prevented him from identifying the agency's specific negligence before the deadline. Successfully navigating Node 1 ensures that a filing is not dismissed on timing grounds before the merits can be considered. The second hurdle is the state law analog. The FTCA requires that the United States is liable only if a private person would be liable locally. You cannot sue for a generic federal violation. The conduct must be translated into a localized state tort. Because the impact was felt in Missouri, the complaint maps the actions of the FDA and CDC into Missouri common law. The complaint utilizes the Missouri tort of negligent misrepresentation. It aligns the elements of duty, the supply of false information, and detrimental reliance with HHS's public statements on vaccine status. Successfully translating a federal administrative action into a localized state tort is the essential requirement for establishing federal court jurisdiction.
Node 3 addresses causation, specifically how to establish a direct link when a third party, the employer, executed the actual injury. Usually, an employer's independent decision acts as an intervening cause, severing the liability chain from the federal agency. The Bennett complaint bypasses this through a conduit theory, arguing the employer was merely a pass-through entity enforcing HHS instructions. Evidence for this theory is found in the employer's written records. The Board of Governors explicitly cited HHS and CDC policy as the factual premise for its mandate and the denial of Bennett's exemption. This differentiates the case from broader precedents like Children's Health Defense v. FDA, where employers were found to have exercised their own discretion. Framing the employer as a conduit rather than an independent actor is the mechanism used to satisfy the Article 3 requirement of traceability.
The final barrier is the discretionary function exception, which protects the government from liability for policy-level decisions. Under the established Berkovitz and Gobert tests, agencies are immune from suit if their conduct involves an element of judgment rooted in social or economic policy. The plaintiff seeks to pierce this immunity by identifying a specific federal regulation that removes agency discretion, 45 CFR Part 46. The complaint argues that 45 CFR Part 46 imposes a mandatory, non-discretionary duty on HHS to ensure informed consent for human subjects of EUA products. If the conduct violates a specific mandatory directive, it is not a protected policy choice. The complaint frames the agency's communications as an operational failure to follow that directive. Identifying a mandatory statutory directive is the necessary step to stripping an administrative agency of its discretionary immunity. These procedural arguments are built to support a claim of quantifiable harm. The complaint outlines $1.83 million in damages, including the present value of lost wages, lost retirement benefits, and out-of-pocket healthcare costs incurred during cancer treatment following the loss of insurance. The legal context is further complicated by the timing of the termination. Bennett was fired while a nationwide preliminary injunction was in effect against the federal employee vaccine mandate. This detail is used to prevent the government from claiming the mandate provided lawful authority for the board's actions during the period it was enjoined by a court. The integration of the damages model and the injunction timing converts procedural theories into a concrete financial demand against the United States. The end of the complaint includes a section identifying critical risks to the litigation. The success of the case depends on whether the court accepts the conduit theory. If the employer is found to have acted with independent discretion, the chain of causation is broken. Additionally, the case survives only if a judge interprets 45 CFR Part 46 as a mandatory duty rather than a broad policy guideline. If those arguments hold, the plaintiff's logic integrates each node, connecting the initial administrative grievance to a triable lawsuit. The Bennett complaint serves as a blueprint for the technical process of holding federal administrative agencies civil liable for the consequences of their policy guidance.